On a cold, rainy evening in late autumn, the streets of a small town were deserted. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain fell in heavy sheets, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Most people had retreated indoors, seeking the warmth and comfort of their homes. But for James Carter, that evening was just another day. James had lived in the town of Ridgely for most of his life. He was a man of few words, content with his quiet life as a writer. His home, nestled at the edge of town near the woods, was a place of solitude, where he could immerse himself in his work. But despite the peace it offered, there was always a lingering feeling of loneliness that accompanied him, especially on nights like this. That evening, James was driving home from the grocery store, his windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. As he made his way down a narrow road, something caught his eye, just a fleeting glimpse, a small movement near the side of the road. At first he thought it was a pile of leaves blown by the wind, but then he saw it again, a shivering, tiny figure huddled near the curb. James slowed his car. His curiosity piqued. He squinted through the rain and realized it was a puppy, soaked to the bone, trembling from the cold. His heart clenched at the sight. Without hesitation, he pulled over and stepped out into the rain, his coat instantly drenched as he hurried toward the little animal. The puppy was barely moving, its fur matted with mud, its body curled into a tight ball as it tried to shield itself from the relentless rain. James knelt down beside it, his heart aching at the pitiful sight. The puppy lifted its head weakly, its eyes barely open, and let out a small whimper. "Hey there, little guy," James said softly, reaching out a hand. The puppy flinched at first, but didn't have the strength to move away. Gently, James scooped the tiny creature into his arms, cradling it against his chest. The puppy's body was cold and frail, and James could feel it trembling against him. "You're coming home with me," he whispered, already knowing there was no way he could leave the puppy out in the storm. Back in the car, James wrapped the puppy in an old blanket he kept in the back seat. The little creature didn't resist, curling into the warmth of the blanket as it let out a soft sigh. James glanced down at it, feeling a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He had never been much of a dog person, but in that moment, something shifted in his heart. When they arrived at James's house, he brought the puppy inside, drying it off with a towel and placing it in front of the fireplace. The warmth of the fire seemed to bring the puppy back to life, its tiny body relaxing as it soaked in the heat. James went to the kitchen, rummaging through his pantry until he found some leftover chicken. He shredded it into small pieces and placed it in a bowl, setting it down in front of the puppy. The little dog sniffed the food cautiously before devouring it in a matter of seconds. James smiled, watching as the puppy licked the bowl clean. He knelt down beside it, gently petting its damp fur. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he murmured. The puppy looked up at him, its eyes finally showing a glimmer of life. James decided then and there that he would keep the dog, at least until he could figure out what to do next. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a temporary arrangement quickly became a permanent one. James named the puppy Cooper, and over time, the little dog transformed from the frail, frightened creature he had found in the rain into a lively, playful companion. Cooper's fur, once matted and dirty, became soft and shiny, and his once timid nature blossomed into one of joy and loyalty. The bond between James and Cooper grew stronger with each passing day. James, who had always preferred his solitude, found himself looking forward to the mornings when Cooper would wake him with a nudge of his nose, eager for their daily walk through the woods. The once lonely house now echoed with the sound of Cooper's paws scampering across the floor, his playful barks filling the quiet spaces that had once felt empty. For James, Cooper was more than just a dog. He was a companion, a source of unconditional love that filled a void James hadn't even realized was there. The long walks in the woods became their favorite ritual, a time when James could clear his mind, and Cooper could run freely, his tail wagging with pure happiness. Years passed, and Cooper grew from a small, vulnerable puppy into a strong, confident dog. He was always by James's side, whether they were hiking in the forest, relaxing by the fire, or simply enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's company. James often marveled at how much his life had changed since the night he had found Cooper in the rain. The little dog had brought a sense of purpose and joy into his life that he had never known before. One winter evening, as James sat by the fire with Cooper resting at his feet, he found himself reflecting on the journey they had been through together. He thought about the night he had found Cooper, cold and scared, and how far they had come since then. Cooper had grown into a magnificent dog, strong, loyal, and full of love. But as James looked down at his companion, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Cooper's movements were slower now. His once boundless energy had begun to fade. His muzzle, once a sleek black, was now speckled with grey, and his eyes, though still bright with love, held a tiredness that hadn't been there before. James felt a pang of sadness as he realized that Cooper was getting old. Over the next few months, it became clear that Cooper's health was declining. He no longer had the stamina for their long walks, and there were days when it seemed like even getting up from his bed took great effort. James did everything he could to make Cooper comfortable, but he knew that the time they had left together was growing shorter. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, James sat beside Cooper, stroking his fur gently. The dog looked up at him with tired eyes, and for a moment, it was as if they both understood that their time together was nearing its end. James's heart ached at the thought of losing his loyal friend, the dog who had brought so much joy and love into his life. "I'm going to miss you, buddy," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. A few weeks later, on a quiet spring morning, Cooper passed away peacefully in his sleep, lying in his favorite spot by the window where the sunlight streamed in. James held him close, his heart breaking as he said goodbye to the dog who had been his constant companion for so many years. The days that followed were filled with grief. The house felt unbearably empty without the sound of Cooper's paws on the floor, without his warm presence by the fire. James missed him terribly, but he took comfort in the memories they had shared, knowing that Cooper had lived a long, happy life filled with love. As time passed, James found solace in honoring Cooper's memory. He planted a tree in his backyard, a place where Cooper had loved to run and play, and placed a small stone beneath it with Cooper's name engraved on it. It became a quiet sanctuary for James, a place where he could go to remember the dog who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. 1 year after Cooper's passing, something remarkable happened. James was sitting in his backyard, watching the tree he had planted sway gently in the breeze, when he heard the faint sound of paws on the ground. He looked up and saw a stray puppy, small and timid, standing at the edge of his yard. The puppy was thin, its fur matted and dirty, much like Cooper had been the night James had found him in the rain. James's heart swelled with emotion as the puppy cautiously approached him, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Without hesitation, James knelt down and held out his hand, just as he had done all those years ago. The puppy sniffed his hand, then wagged its tail hesitantly. James smiled through his tears, feeling a deep sense of déjà vu. It was as if Cooper had sent this little one to him, a new companion to fill the void left in his heart. James scooped up the puppy, cradling it in his arms just as he had done with Cooper all those years ago. "Welcome home," he whispered. And in that moment, James knew that love, once given, never truly fades. It comes back to us in unexpected ways, filling our hearts with joy and healing, just as Cooper had done so many years ago.